recognise Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which it captured from Syria in 1967. Speaking in Jerusalem, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said President Trump had made history. Senior Palestinian official Saeb Erekat said the policy change was a recipe for conflict between Palestinians and Israelis. All this ahead of a general election in Israel next month, of course. Let's speak now to Debra. Shushan. She is Director of Policy and Government Relations at Americans for Peace Now. Good to talk to you. I mean, your organisation makes no secret of its stance on this, but it is a curious one, isn't it? Mr. Trump and Netanyahu clearly have established a bond, but this is an enormous electoral help to Mr. Netanyahu.
It certainly is, and I'm afraid that it's not a curious stance as far as the Trump administration is concerned, even though it is curious when you look at the consistent U.S. policy toward Israel in the Golan Heights since 1967, and especially since 1981, when Israel effectively annexed the Golan Heights, which the U.S. refused to recognize, joining a unanimous UN Security Council resolution that opposed that move and called on Israel to rescind it. So in that sense, it's curious, but it's not at all curious, as you pointed out, given the fact of the very close relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the fact that it has been obvious, quite frankly, for a long time, that President Trump would do anything that he could in order to deliver Netanyahu a big perceived foreign policy win on the eve of the Israeli election.
And I guess this move on the Golan may not change that much on the ground, but it will give encouragement, won't it, to people in Israeli politics pushing much harder now to annex the West Bank.
You are exactly right. This process started, well, I shouldn't say it started, but most recently, last week, you had the State Department Human Rights Report, which came out that completely eliminated the use of the words occupied and occupation with reference to the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And then as far as the Golan Heights were concerned, for the first time in the Human Rights Report, it was no longer referred to as Israeli occupied, but rather Israeli controlled. And this obviously was noticed within Israel by Israeli politicians. You had the leader of the new right party, Naftali Bennett, say that it was therefore incumbent upon Israelis, since the Trump administration clearly was waving the green flag, it was incumbent upon Israelis to annex the West Bank, or at least parts of it. He's indicated that in the first week of the new Knesset, his party, the new right party, will introduce a bill to annex Area C, which is about 60% of the West Bank. And after that move of referring to the Golan Heights as Israeli controlled rather than occupied, even before Trump's declaration today on Twitter, you had Yuli Edelstein, who's the Speaker of the Israeli Knesset, the #2 on the Likud list in the upcoming election, who said that it is now, the time has now come for Israel to annex the West Bank, because clearly if the United States is willing to recognize annexation of the Golan Heights, why shouldn't the West Bank be next?
Debra Shushan, it sounds like we're going to be back to this one. For the moment, thank you very much indeed.